you're on.
Hi.
Hi.
Odie here. I was supposed to be here Tuesday, and I can't make any excuses because I don't have any,
Okay.
other than I wasn't here.
You're
But today
busy.
is Thursday.
But you were busy putting a book together.
Yeah, that's true. But I didn't want to use that as an excuse, but I guess I have to say that's what it was. Was involved doing that.
And the book may be out in September, more than likely.
The last week in September, I'll give you the privilege of mentioning the name of the book.
The book is Ghetto Sketches 2021.
Let's get on schedule 2021.
Okay.
Okay.
And so today, what are you going to do for us?
Okay. I thought I would give us a little brief social insight to something that may be, I hope, of interest to almost anybody who is civilized. And I'm calling what I'm about to read the Insensitive Society.
Ah.
You know, we had Johnson with his Great Society and Kennedy with the Carmelite Society. But it seems to me that no one has really addressed the Insensitive Society.
All right. Well, go on with yourself.
Okay, so this is a, what do you call it? I think you would call it a sociological essay, since I'm not a sociologist by training, but I think I am by instinct, and I have enough interest in sociological norms to grasp what certain kinds of changes mean. And so, rather than try to over-explain everything, let me start off reading The Insensitive Society.
Please.
The Insensitive Society. Here's the intro. Dedicated to my loud, inconsiderate next-door neighbors. Rude beasts who never resisted the opportunity to be as negative and disturbing as possible. Authentic representatives of the Insensitive Society.
Oh, this was written some time ago.
Yes.
We have good neighbors now.
But
Okay.
it's even more pertinent now than it was
Yes.
then.
Okay. All right.
Because a lot of us are being forced to stay indoors, and you look up and discover that your next door neighbors, the upstairs neighbor, the downstairs neighbors, are just simply totally being inconsiderate.
Yes, especially in apartment settings.
But I'll just read it and let you reach your own conclusions.
There.
I don't completely agree with my friend Donna, who states in her dry metallic tones, it all began to go downhill when the guys in the gas station stopped checking our oil, wiping off our windshields and saying, have a safe trip. No doubt, these might have been contributing factors, but I feel the greatest building block for the development of the Insensitive Society must be labeled television.
Ooh.
In any case, millions would never be able to remember when gas station attendants checked oil, wiped off windshields, or said anything courteously. But most of us can easily recall the vivid squabbling that we witnessed yesterday night, as they say in some places, or one of the argument shows. Perhaps they could be called Springerizations. Those television spectaculars that emphasize the most dysfunctional elements of our domestic/emotional circumstances. They're usually hinged on the purely predictable. Somebody done somebody wrong. They seem to take a special interest in the dysfunctional element if it's interracial/transgender/crisscross gender and is willing to willing to wash all of their dirty stuff in front of millions of TV fools. The people and the situations are dredged up from the sludge of shallow emotional barrels and stirred around by a number of unscrupulous hosts. The studio audiences set the low-level tone thing by howling at violent actions, attempted violent actions, and as much pornographic language as the participants can scream/beep at each other. It's going on now. Going on now.
Yes.
The host channels the activities into the murkiest channels he can possibly think of, and the audiences applaud his negative guidance. It would not be difficult to imagine that thousands of home viewers, locked into an emotional embrace with their studio peers, also chanting and clapping for the worst that the host can provoke. Spanish version available. The most dysfunctional elements tend to hinge on any kind of decidedly kinky sexual experience. The kinkier, the better. This daily feeding seems to serve as an emotional Novocaine for the public perception of what could be considered good or loud, best or worse, humane or simply stupid. After repeated injections of this kind of dope, a kind of insensitivity settles in, an insensitivity that is creating the society we're trying to live in, or that many of us unwillingly will find ourselves in. I don't want anyone to mistake what I'm saying for something that might come over Fox News.
All right.
We may not be able to point a fickle finger at the gas stations to blame them for the decibel increase in our lives. That honor will have to go to other sources. I think the first time I really noticed a decibel increase was in a movie theater when my date leaned over and shouted in my ear, "The sound is awfully loud, don't you think?" Suddenly I became aware that we were being saturated in loudness. I trotted up the aisle behind 5 other sensitive types to speak to the manager about the deafening level of the sound in the theater. I don't think it gave any of us a lot of pleasure to see him remove wads of cotton from his ears as we spoke to him. He received our complaints with a professional smile. "Well, if you're dissatisfied, we'll be more than happy to refund your tickets." "I'll take you up on your offer, but what about the loudness?" "Some people seem to like it loud," he said, as he replaced the cotton wads in his ears. We stared at each other helplessly, trying to figure out why anyone needed Dolby sound decibels for a subtitled film. Since that evening, years ago now, the decibel levels have climbed steadily. The more deaf we became, the louder we must talk, sing, turn up the sounds that separate us from each other. Personally, on the greedy level, I'm trying to invest in as much audio stock as possible. I hear that there will be a bull market there at the end of this century, or perhaps before. It's the crucial scene in the third act of one of Shakespeare's best. It's the scene in Casablanca where Ilsa may not decide to go back into a life of resistance with Victor Laszlo. It's the moment that two lovers have been probing for. It's all of these things and so many more that we can't begin to list them, and they're being interrupted by the sneaky pealing of the cell phone. Coitus celiphonitis plagues us, and there's no end of it in sight, pun intended. On the honest to God level, there's no telling what's all going to come to, no pun intended. Wars, man-made famines. These are two of the greatest failings of the human race because they're both completely unnecessary and unavoidable. Wars on Earth are clearly the result of irrational negative logic. It has to be. How else can we explain why people would continue to kill each other when it poses a no-win so result for all concerned? The people who are victorious, the winners, will say, "We won, we defeated you, we're the conquerors, you're the conquered." How could any human being claim a victory over another human being after they both lost friends, family, respect for the sanctity of life? It's impossible to trace the DNA of the urge to war, but we can be certain that the marker was first fixed in the male psyche. Perhaps things would be different if men were the ones having babes. Man-made famines like the vicious wars that have claimed a place in our planet's history are also the results of irrationality, negative logic. By definition, a man-made famine is one that is the result of man's unwillingness to pay attention to the forces of nature, or his misuse of the resources that nature has made available. Unfortunately, men frequently use famines as surrogate allies in their wars with each other. The premise is simple. If we can deny your population food, we will have a weakened enemy. That is probably the grimmest misuse of a famine. But there are also other reasons and ways to impose starvation on a population. Hitler used his concentration camps. Others have used blockades and embargoes to accomplish their purposes. One of the most unique ways that some of the more powerful nations have used to create famines is to give the famine-ridden nations food. Charitable gifts of corn or rice will prevent the famine-stricken nations from growing their own food, thus guaranteeing future crop food shortages and ultimately famine. Smart, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Interpersonal relations in our insensitive society have become so rotten that many psychologists and other mental health care specialists have titled this the Age of Rage.
Mm.
Dr. Jack Lee has been studying the various types of rage that are prevalent in our society today. I won't grossly list these in any particular order. Let's start with road rage. I've heard the argument made that we wouldn't have any evidence of road rage if the automobile had not been invented. I'd have to agree with that. Abruptly, our dimensions have expanded way beyond the horse and buggy. We have more roads to occupy, more power at our command. With the horse and buggy, we could only envision ourselves in terms of hundreds of miles. Now we can travel thousands of miles. Our perimeters have been expanded beyond a past generation's wildest dreams. And with the dreams have come nightmares, people who feel that they own the road, or that they should own the road. The huge vehicles that we see these days are clearly an expression of that wish fulfillment. The subcurrent rage is fueled by exaggerated feelings of self-importance, inspired by the vehicle one is driving. The little man/woman weighing under 150 pounds, soaking wet, suddenly becomes a Humvee SUV monster. The rage can also be found on those who are suffering. The rage can also be found in those who are suffering from lack of self-esteem. Their cause is just as ordinary. And finally, in relation to the various forms of road rage, there are thousands who are feeling enraged because they're driving, and they know deep down that they're not really going anywhere. Postal rage, or going postal, is an unfair hit on the postal service. I would choose to call it job rage, because I'm certain that there have been, and probably will be, many more people who go on killing rampages in ordinary occupations other than in the post office. The big question is, why does it happen? The biggest reason, I think, is dissatisfaction. Dissatisfaction with the work environment, the lack of satisfaction to be derived from the work itself, and the simple human need to be known as more than a time card labor unit. Purely personal rage, as distinguished from road rage or job rage, seems stem from many of the neurotic circumstances that make so many areas of modern life so meaningless. I think the chant in the movie Network sums it up pretty well. We're mad as hell, and we're not going to take it anymore. The problem with the chant, the mantra, is that it is so vague. Mad as hell about what? Not going to take what anymore? Of course, in the recesses of our collective national consciousness, we know what the chant really means, but at the same time, there's something completely inarticulate about it. A bone stuck in our throats that we couldn't swallow or spit out. I need not put quotation marks around racial rage. It is not something that needs to be highlighted or underlined. It's all around us. And despite the blind members of our society, on the right mostly, who have heralded the premature death of racism, it is alive and kicking. As a matter of fact, racial rage may be at an apex in this era. Let there be no doubt about it. The racial rage fire is fueled by the white male perception that they have lost their privileged position in our society, and fortunately, they have. Throat is hot.
Yes.
In their attempts to regain a position they never should have had in the first place, they are willing to do raw murder, commit judicial crimes, develop coded laws, circle their wagons in a last-ditch effort to retain the glories of their past. And they aren't all just Southern either, y'all. The rampant sexual rage that finds its most extreme form in pedophilia was probably nailed into place during slavery. Once again, as all honest Americans know, white men were kings of the hill at that juncture in our history and could commit any abhorrent sexual act they could imagine. The master could rape his slaves, male and female, young and old, and their children, and his children by those who were enslaved without any legal consequences be considered. We must remember any concern for the moral, physical, humane rights of the enslaved was kicked to the curb when slavery was institutionalized. The master could even rape his own wife and children with impunity, and they often did just that. The slave era, which lasted for hundreds of years, was a heyday for the rapist, the pedophile, and the deviant. Astounding as it is, the psychosexual history of our country is seldom considered when we write, discuss, or attempt to theorize about why there are so many sexual weirdos amongst us. It may simply be a part of the country's DNA. Motherfucker.
I understand.
I would like to suggest that the pathology of some of the sexual rage that we see these days is a direct result of a loss of sexual privilege, the loss of right to commit perversions. Yes, they're mad as hell because they can't take it anymore. Of course, some will ask, how does that explain black sexual rage? I suspect the foregoing will go a long way toward explaining that. After all, the concept of a motherfucker was given birth in America, not Africa. Dr. Lee continues, I suspect that academic rage and political rage might be bleeding from the same vein. We hold these truths to be self-evident that America, like most Western states, has always been suspicious of and a trifle hostile to its intellectuals, its thinkers, and those heroic figures who tried to fight the intelligent wars. In every way possible, economically, socially, politically, the academics have been relegated to a lower caste level. Teachers are paid far below the price of their worth to our society. Socially, they've usually been labeled something mildly degrading. Oh, he's just an egghead or a nerd. And on the political side, they usually been the victims of the political system, seldom the beneficiaries. Woodrow Wilson was probably the last president we've had who had any connections to academia. It's okay for the politician to be smart. Didn't Clinton go to Oxford on a scholarship? But he shouldn't represent anything intelligent. Academic has acquired the coding of something rigid, unimaginative, and I feel it has made many academicians angry and foul-tempered. You can get a real sense of this from reading the obscure theories in a number of academic journals. The political rage is more widely shared. It doesn't take hundreds of studies, surveys, or polls to determine that many Americans of all political persuasions feel left out of the political process. They have reasoned that money and television determine the worth of the candidate's value, not their votes.
Uh-huh.
This reasoned opinion has created a reservoir of non-voters, people who feel impotent because they don't think that their vote has any value. And outraged because one political race after another clearly demonstrates that fact.
Wow.
We only have to look at the last presidential coup for validation of the impotent voters' anger. The young/old rage has reached the epidemic proportions, viciously driven by unscrupulous hustlers who have developed ingenious techniques to nourish the neurosis that they make money from. By utilizing every medium they can buy into, they have convinced the young that they should never grow old, that they should hate the old, and convince the old that they should despise the young. Clever advertising seldom reveals any link between being young, once upon a time, and eventually becoming old. The fresh ads of the taut bodies, hair-ridden heads, and gloriously white teeth simply reflect the brainwasher's fantasies. And too few question those parodies of real life. We're taught that no one wants to get old. Growing old is equivalent to a living death, compounded by arthritis and loss of power. The advertisers have even convinced many of the old senior citizens. What is the opposite of senior citizen? Junior citizen?
I guess.
That they could be young forever. Take 3 of these 6 times a day and you'll feel young again. Swallow 10 spoons of this every morning and you'll feel young again.
Oh my.
By feeding on the insecurities that are promoted by the usual suspects, we are saturated by people whose chronological identities have been smashed out of shape. The very young want to be a little older so that they can buy a beer and drive a car, but not too old because that would entail being forced to take responsibility for being mature. And the mature, the senior citizens, are being encouraged to forget about the experiences that have enabled them to avoid the pitfalls of the young. Been there, done that. And so here we are, being played on by hordes of neurotic, greedy beasts. To keep my own personal balance in this matter, I'm a baby boomer. Get it? A baby boomer. I often think about the advice that this 85-year-old African-American lady who was finally graduated from high school gave. If you don't want to get gray and wrinkled, die young. And find we have a cornucopia of rages, what we might call an umbrella of rages, neurotic flashpoints that often create tragic circumstances. They will say, he was always such a nice old man. We had no indication that he was going to slash his whole family to death with that machete. Or we called him Egghead Johnny because he always had his head stuck in a book. Who could possibly imagine that he would take 2 of his dad's guns to school and kill 15 of his classmates? Oh no, not Sally. It couldn't have been Sally. Sally was the best bookkeeper we ever had. 20 years on the job, never missed a day in all that time. Why would you want to go shoot 6 strangers? And so it goes. Rude bureaucrats are irretrievably woven with rude citizens because in many cases they're the same. First, let's define rude by offering 2 examples. He sits behind a desk or more likely a bulletproof window in these violence-prone times, refusing to answer pertinent questions that they have no logical answers to. The absurd rule for this is those who know won't tell, and those who know refuse to tell because it would reveal the incoherency of their positions. Secondly, the petty tyrants, many policemen, who have always lusted for power, or at least the capability to deny others the benefits that a democratic society is supposed to grant to all its citizens. There they are. Soft-humped stumbling blocks for all of the rights that a democratic society is supposed to offer. But because we become such an insensitive society, none of these so-called, used to be so-called norms are existent. Disrespectful young people are the misdirected spin-offs of an insensitive society. Make no mistake about it, plainly speaking, I'm saying that disrespectful means, number one, a lack of reverence for the elders, all of them, living and or dead. Number two, a lack of etiquette in how to deal with one's peers and other people. Number three, disregard for civilized lifestyle, period. Now, having said that, let's dig a little deeper to determine how young disrespect is created. We should place the blame for their negligent development squarely on the backs of their elders. The so-called elders who are so busy trying to be young find themselves unwilling and finally unable to enforce the reverence codes that must be a part of the growing process. The so-called elders relegating their responsibilities to negative institutions, television, irrelevant schools, the police, never managed to install the legacy of a behavior that must be transmitted if our children are going to become responsible elders.
Right.
It gets to be a bit freaky at times, this circular pattern of avoiding the inevitable. And it is inevitable that our children will become disrespectful thugs if we, the elders, do not take the responsibility for demonstrating what responsibility and respect are all about.
Yes. Yes.
As most of us already know, our government tells lies, large and small, every day. Some of our highest government figures and agencies habitually lie. Let's call that gaslighting. Perhaps this is true of governments all over the planet. This habitual way of lying by our lawmakers, officials, responsible individuals, spinmeisters, tends to create a terrible trickle-down effect, justifying the average citizen's subconscious belief in an insensitive society. A society that rewards those who can get away with it, whatever it is. Since it has been clearly demonstrated by centuries of expert observation that truth is the first casualty of war, we hasten to add that lying must be considered a primary collateral damage.
Oh, okay.
I've only got a couple more pages here now, so bear with me.
I certainly will.
I know this has been going on. When a society becomes benumbed by the lies that it has chosen to support, simply to delude itself into thinking that all is good and well, we can be certain we've burrowed deeply into the core of what constitutes an insensitive society. Graffiti and fascistic patriotism might, at first glance, seem to have little in common, but let's delve a little bit to see the connecting dots.
Yes.
The people who do graffiti tend to be underachieving, low self-esteem males with serious identity issues. They are desperate to tell the world, somebody, that they exist. Perhaps we could call their graffiti a form of flag waving.
Flag waving?
In most cases, the flag waving is for gang and turf. And make no mistake about it, there is an element of fascism connected to the whole business. This is the way I think it should be, this is the way I want it, and that's that. The patriots who wave the flag, a form of graffiti for many of the super fascists, would never equate themselves to the tagger who is sneaking around late at night, spray canning other people's walls, disregarding their rights. But the juxtapositions are there for all to see.
Of course.
The tagger wants to usurp our rights to aesthetic privacy. Ditto for the patriot who wants to wave the flag in your face and have the same meaning happen for you as it does for him. Well, I don't believe in wearing a mask or taking the vaccine, so you shouldn't either. And if you do wear a mask and take the vaccine, I'm going to rub up against you to see if I can infect you with my sense of stuff. He can't really figure out why some African Americans get a bit tongue-tied trying to sing the national anthems. or recite the meaningless pledge to the flag. The tagger feels that his cause is great and just, even if his argument is backed up with faults as the one that dissects California's. The flag-waving tagger may depend on arguments that are substantially more sophisticated than the graffiti tagger, but their desired ends are virtually identical. We want to have it our way.
Right.
Fortunately, it is possible to do nonviolent counterattacks on each of these graffiti patriots. In the first case, a good coat of paint will cover up the stains. In the second case, flag waving being more sophisticated than the other, a deliberate attempt to see the flag as really is a piece of cloth with a peculiar design on it, and to know that a piece of cloth is not worth dying for, should be enough to put matters in their proper perspective.
There you go.
Hopefully.
Hopefully.
And finally, random boredom. Most of us are overstimulated, a negative byproduct of modern life. Drugs, the television, the computers, unimaginative movies, ubiquitous cell phones, sex ads, etc., etc. The catalyst for decibel levels of excitement that are so high that whenever any segment of our lives sinks to normal, that is below the excitement level, we have to feel bored,
Right.
especially the younger people. The younger people, never having known anything but excitement, are especially susceptible to random boredom. They are also the victims of an audio technology that is responsible for most of them having a 50% hearing loss before the age of 30.
Yeah.
The testimonial to this fact can be determined by visiting any gathering of younger people. The sounds of whatever it is that they're listening to is way up because they can't hear whatever it is unless it is played, spoken, or sound way up.
Yes.
Needless to say, whispering has become a lost art for them.
Amen.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes, I know what you're saying.
I heard that. Congruent with the excitement and the decibel levels resulting in subnormal hearing must be added attention deficit disorders. How could it be otherwise? After a lifetime of refined sugar, fast foods, and half-hour sitcoms, there's no wonder that a whole new generation of unchanneled people find themselves unable to focus on any particular subject, thought, or idea for any length of time. Or our more unscrupulous politicians depend on this shortened attention span to be able to carry out their worst plans. We don't have to worry about the public. They will have forgotten why we didn't have a real answer for that if we could wait 3 days, the news cycle.
Right.
Obviously, this shortened attention span also makes it difficult to get them involved with projects that demand sustained attention. You can bet that Rome these days would not have been built if it took more than a day. Thus, we find ourselves afflicted by a weird kind of modern malaise, an insensitivity to life because we can no longer feel that there's anything or anybody to care about. When we reach the point of not really caring whether the planet we live on lives or dies, then we have definitely become an insensitive society. It seems that we're more than halfway there. Global warming, anyone?
Ooh.
And that brings me to the end of my soapbox.
Insensitive Society.
And the Insensitive Society,
Yes.
I thank you all for listening to this rant. I wrote it, I don't know, about 5 years ago.
Yes.
And I think I need to update it so that it becomes the more insensitive society. On that note, Zola Salena-Hawkins, I appreciate your direction and your superb lighting, which enabled me to see the material that I was writing perfectly, even if I did not have glasses.
This is good.
I don't know what else to say other than the fact that I've got to get out of here.
Well, your website is www.odiehawkins.com.
Is that what it is? Could you repeat that, please?
Your website is www.odiehawkins.com. ODIEHAWKINS. You're also on the author's page on Amazon. And again, you have Ghetto Sketches 2021 coming out more likely in late September or October. And it's ebook $3.99. And the book, $13.99. An updated version of Ghetto Sketches.
Ghetto Sketches 2021.
That's what it's called.
All right, that sounds good to me.
All right, and the cover is by Tony Gleason.
Oh, wow, okay.
And pictures are by Zola Salena-Hawkins.
That's you.
And research done by Zola Salena.
That's also you.
Yes.
So, wow.
All right.
You're all up in there.
Well, you know, I'm your partner.
Oh, that's great. I'm so glad to have you aboard.
And your wife.
We'll have to raise your pay. I don't want to talk about what you get paid now, but then we got to raise it.
Moving right along.
Because I tell you, I'm not one of the insensitive members of this society.
I know you're not.
And I'm trying even harder not to be.
I appreciate that. Well, Itness.
Itness.
See you next time.
See you next time, Alfred.
Yes.
Oh, you too, James.
And Susan.
And all the rest of my Tai Chi family.
And Facebook family.
And Facebook. And Susan.
Yes.
And Master Tom.
Oh, Master Tom.
And Master Ken.
Okay.
And Raymond De Silva.
Ah, going back there, aren't we?
Dr. Daniel Hoover and Mrs. Veronica Hoover and
Yes.
and Milana
And Koa.
Koi.
Koa. Yes.
Koa.
Oh, yes.
Koa, forgive me.
Uh-huh.
Forgive me, Koa.
All special folks.
All special people.
Okay. Oh, and Dr. Gray.
Oh,
And the Gray
Dr.
family.
Gray, and to my late great mother-in-law, Queen Jewel Gray.
And finally, Herbert Lee Mosley, your brother-in-law.
Hey, Mr. Herbert. Mr. Herbert.
Enough. All right. In this again.
Itness back.
Ciao.
Ciao.